Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is the 1-minute chart of silver provided by netdania.com. You can click on the link below. And we had a bit of a downdraft today. You can see when you go to the 5-minute that we kind of fell off the cliff starting last night, and then we just continued down. And of course, the news of the day, or the news of the week, or the news of the month has been the Europe and Euro situation, that they're kind of going back and forth to print or not to print. That's the question. So silver is reacting to that. The stock market's reacting to that. Gold is reacting to that as well. You can see on the weekly chart we're still dropping down on the MACD. We're looking for a rollover to the upside, but we're still falling fairly sharply with both of these lines. So are we reaching some point where we're going to drop drastically? We may. We're not at that point yet. You can see our trend lines are still in place, and then we'd have to go tighter in to get the most recent trend line that we're at. So I want to go into probably the 8-hour, maybe a little bit closer. Let's try the 8-hour on this. So the line that we're looking for, there really isn't a much tighter line than what we have already. You can see 28 and 24 come in as key areas. Maybe this line right here seems to be violated. So we may have another off the cliff sort of moment like we had here and we had here. We had an excellent video by Victory Independence. It was covered on Zero Hedge. I put it on my blog. You can see that, projecting that if we do get another big drop, that we may see the disconnect between physical silver and the paper price. But I wanted to address another topic on this video. This is going to be kind of a tinfoil hat conspiracy type theory video, so if you're not into that sort of thing, you might want to tune out. Anyway, I wanted to, and this is going to ultimately come back to silver, but it's going to be a long road to get there. So let's start off. We want to start out with technocracy or technocrats. That's something that's been in the news a lot lately, and we're going to see how that ties in. But first, let's examine this new technocracy movement. This is technocracy. There's also a technocracy movement. There isn't an entry in Wikipedia for technocrat, but this pretty much sums it up well. Technocracy is a hypothetical form of government in which science would be in control of all decision making. Scientists, engineers, and technologists who have knowledge, expertise, or skills would compose the governing body, instead of politicians, businessmen, and economists. In a technocracy, decision makers would be selected based upon how knowledgeable and skillful they are in their field. Now, the reason why I researched this, I don't know if you do what I do, but I watch very little mainstream media, very little mainstream press, and I would say maybe 5%, 10%. I know the comments about my listening to Sean Hannity were pretty excited and colorful. I'm not a big Sean Hannity fan by any stretch, but I do listen to a lot of the talk radio people on both the left and the right. There's not a lot of talk radio on the left, but there is a lot of mainstream media on the left. So try to listen to both the left and the right. As you know, I have pretty much described myself as a libertarian bent, and I did want to give a shout out for the Ron Paul money bomb that's going on. I believe it's December 16th. One of my listeners asked me to do that, so you can go to Ron Paul's website and find out about that. So I tend to be in the libertarian camp, of course, which is a camp that supports free markets and is for smaller government. Now, this technocracy movement, or this technocrat term, the reason why I became interested in this is because I noticed in just the little amount of mainstream media that I follow, all of a sudden this term just, at least for me, seemed to come out of nowhere. It wasn't a term I was really familiar with. It wasn't a term I heard a lot. It was just a term that seemed to appear out of the blue. So I'm going to take you to the conspiracy part of this, and then I'm going to try to flesh it out how it works out in the real world. So I decided to do a little research. You can do research yourself on Google Trends. Also had someone show me how to use Google Insights, and the Google Insights was actually much better. So what I wanted to do, normally when you do a search on Google, you can specify the date. When you go to the advanced options, you can specify the date. You can search within the last week, you can search within the last month, you can search within the last year, etc. But what I wanted was a search that told me when something first started occurring, when something became a big deal. So this site sort of gives it to you, Google Trends as well. Now I've researched the term technocrat and its appearance in the search engines and the media, etc. And you can see this is actually a short-term view. I'll start out with a long-term view. You can go and choose your views. 2004 to the present is the longest term view, so we want to look at that one. You can see this basically goes from 0 to 100, 0 being really no mention, not important, nothing, and 100 being, of course, all over the place. So the first thing we note here is that just this year, this term absolutely exploded in use. So what we want to do is we want to zoom in a little bit closer. We can choose the last 90 days and start to zoom in here. And what they do on this site is they also link the news stories. Now, this is the one that's really fascinating here. You'll see that we have this spike at A where we reached nearly 100, and it pretty much occurred nearly in a single day. And what's very interesting is we get this news story that's linked on A. And now for your tinfoil hat folks, you'll notice that the link here says, as we click on it, the date on this term becoming mainstream is 11/11/11. So the worldwide birth, we'll say, of this being in the public eye was on 11/11/11, and this is the article, this is the key article, Papademos, Greek technocrat with safe pair of hands. So for those of you who've been following the Greek situation, this was pretty much the end of Greek democracy and the beginning of Greek technocracy. Now that's really important because as libertarians we believe in free markets, we believe in democracy, and we believe in, hopefully, republicanism, democracy to the extent that the popular will of the people should prevail in those areas where they are allowed to vote. They should not be allowed to vote to take your property or to squelch your speech, etc. So we're a Republican form of government with a democratic elected legislature, etc. That's our constitutional form of government. Now Europe, on the other hand, has been more democratic in the sense that they have people voting, and what you're seeing now in Europe, at least in my opinion, is the breakdown of democracy. Now, it's not, in my opinion, true democracy to have people voting monies from other people's property. So, in my opinion, true democracy does not constitute people getting money from the government, which the government took from someone else. That's would be something that libertarians would consider to be the key violation of property rights and the key violation of Republican form of government. So that's the area that democracy should never tread upon. Of course, we know that the historians have told us that democracy always collapses and is followed by dictatorship. Now, it appears that democracy in Greece is going to be followed with technocracy. So let's read a little bit of this article and see why this is so key. And you want to keep in mind when we're reading this that this was all planned. This was planned by the press. This was planned by the government in the EU. This was planned possibly by the Greek leadership and also perhaps Goldman Sachs and the Federal Reserve and everybody else. So this is a big big conspiracy theory, but let's read this article here. Athens, Lucas Papademos, sworn in Friday to lead an emergency government, is regarded by many as the safe pair of hands needed to steer Greece through its crippling debt crisis and even its last hope. As vice president of the European Central Bank until 2010, so he's a banker, he was considered by many analysts as a driving force behind the institution, winning high international regard for his financial expertise. The 64-year-old bespectacled economist, so here's your technocrat, he's an economist. Now, apparently the EU or many of the governments have high opinion of economists. I have a very low opinion of economists. My opinion of economists is probably one notch below weathermen, politicians, and lawyers. The 64-year-old bespectacled economist, seen as a skilled backroom operator, prefers to shun the limelight, but his global contacts and inside knowledge of European monetary policy will be vital in saving his country from bankruptcy. While he spent several years sitting at press conferences beside then ECB chief Jean-Claude Trichet, he almost never intervened, preferring to defer questions to his boss. It is this quiet, technocratic profile that many view as the perfect attribute to end months of political squabbling and lead Greece to new elections to try to keep a vital EU debt bailout afloat. He is a passionate European, having masterminded Greece's transition from the drachma to the euro. So, how did that work out for you? And his academic publications have also focused heavily on the economic theory behind the currency union. Quote, I'm convinced that the participation in the euro is a guarantee of monetary stability and a factor of economic stability, he told reporters on Thursday, moments after President Kyriakos Papaleis gave a mandate to form a new government. Quote, the Greek economy is facing huge problems despite the enormous efforts made. Greece is at a crucial crossroads, he said, adding, the course will not be easy. In a recent opinion article in Greek daily to Vima, he warned that forcing banks to accept heavy losses on their holdings of Greece's debt would entail important dangers. Yes, of course, making the banks take losses, making Goldman Sachs take losses, making the people who made risky bets with backed up by taxpayer money actually take the losses. Yes, that would be very dangerous. Quote, the potential economic benefits from a debt restructuring will be much smaller than what is frequently forecast, and the procedure entails important dangers for Greece and the Eurozone, he said. In the end, banks accepted to write off half of their Greek debt holdings. Now, if you remember, I covered that was not considered a credit default event, and therefore Goldman Sachs and the rest of the Wall Street banksters and shysters and pinstripe bandits, they didn't have to pay out on their insurance CDS that they'd written on the debt. So, of course, they managed to come out great. Wiping nearly one-third off of Greece's debt pile, around 350 billion euros, as part of the agreement Papademos would be asked to oversee. Persuading him to take over the leadership of government took 4 long days, as he reportedly produced a long list of demands, including extending the election date beyond February and including conservatives in the cabinet. This caused huge delays to his appointment, and at times he even looked to be completely out of the running, several times with politicians turning to others. In addition to his international standing, he is also well respected in Greece as a former governor of the central bank, a professor at Athens University, and more recently an economic advisor to previous Prime Minister George Papandreou. Like Papandreou, he was educated in part in the United States, taking a Master of Science in Electrical Engineering, a PhD in philosophy at MIT, and after leaving ECB, he again crossed the Atlantic, accepting a professorship at Harvard University. There was some doubt, however, whether he would return to Athens to accept the job as prime minister if offered the post. In June, he turned down Papandreou's offer to serve as finance minister. He now faces a mountainous to-do list. His first job will be to persuade the EU and International Monetary Fund to disperse an €8 billion, $11 billion slice of aid from 2010 bailout deal that is desperately needed by December 15th before the coffers run dry. Then he must force through painful austerity measures exacted as the price for a second EU bailout package, which gives Athens a $100 billion euro in loans, the same amount in debt reduction, and a further $30 billion in guarantees. But he should at least not be out of touch with the chaos that awaits him. The course he was teaching at Harvard is entitled, quote, "The Global Financial Crisis, Policy Responses and Challenges." So here's your technocrat, and this was clearly planned. This is a planned story. It came out on 11/11/11, and it is a no vote for democracy. It is a no vote for free markets, and it is a yes vote for a totalitarian, technocratic dictatorship. So that's obviously the plan they have for Greece, probably the plan that they have for Europe, and possibly the plan that they have for the United States and even the entire world. So that's pretty clear by looking at Google that this was a planned coup of the media and press, and this was not some coincidence that on 11/11/11 they took down the first nation in the world and began to set up their new future technocracy. Now, I wanted to jump over and take a look at, in my opinion, where technocracy leads. So I don't know if any of you have seen this story. This is a very interesting story that's been covered here and there. This is the butter shortage in Norway. So many of you haven't heard of this, but it's very interesting. They're paying astronomical prices for butter in Norway. And we're going to read, this is from newsinenglish.no, so I suppose this is a translation of a Norwegian story. So this is the story of the butter crisis, and then I'll give some commentary. Butter shortage slices high tariffs. Norwegian authorities eased their strict protectionist policies this week when they finally lowered import tariffs to offset a sudden shortage of butter. Otherwise, though, protectionism is alive and well, with Norwegian lamb and tour bus companies the latest to avoid competition from cheaper foreign providers. The butter shortage has riled customers, especially bakers, on the eve of the big holiday baking season. It's been almost impossible to find ordinary butter on the shelves of Norwegian grocery stores in recent weeks, with dairy giant Tine blaming everything from the weather to lower milk production and higher consumer demand caused by a low carbohydrate diet fad. Others blame Tine for poor planning. Officials of the dairy cooperative that dominates the market in Norway finally felt compelled to ask state agricultural authorities, who normally protect Tine and their dairy farmers, to reduce the tariff on butter from abroad. Tine realized that otherwise there would be a shortage of around 50 tons of butter a week in Norway through December, when demand is at its highest. That threatened to make Tine highly unpopular. The dairy co-op already had cut its cheese production in order to boost butter production, but supplies of milk are so low it wasn't enough. On Tuesday, the authorities went along with the request, slicing the tariff, called toll in Norwegian, from the usual krona 25.19 per kilo to just 4 for the entire month of December. That should mean that imported butter or butter locally made from imported products will be on the shelves by next. Tine's smaller rival, dairy product maker Finden, had its plans ready to import butter from Belgium. Finden doesn't make butter itself, but has an annual import quota of 260 tons that it will now use. While the Norwegian authorities were allowing some relief to consumers of butter, though they have tightened restrictions in two different areas, lamb meat imports and tour bus operations. The new restrictions on imports of lamb meat from poor countries have raised the question of double standards. Norway's left-center government coalition, which includes the highly protectionist and farm-friendly Centre Party, scored some anti-poverty points a few years ago when it promoted boosting imports of lamb from producers in Africa. Newspaper Aftenposten reported this week that the government wasn't happy that only 0.3% of Norway's total meat imports came from poor countries that Norway wanted to help. So Namibia in southern Africa on the list of countries able to import without being subject to tariffs or quotas concentrated on the Norwegian market. Exports from Namibia to Norway jumped from 43 tons in 2008 to 288 tons in 2009. Imports reached 239 tons just during the first 6 months of last year, but then the Norwegian authorities cracked down. Quote, "We would have hurt Norwegian production." So this goes on. You can read the story. I'm going to link it below. These are the results of your technocrats. These are what your technocrats do. These are people who believe they know better than the people. So they're anti-democratic. And they believe they know better than the free market. They're anti-free market. So the technocrats are anti-democratic and anti-free market. Now, why? Why are these people this way? Well, of course, they are totalitarians, and they are scientists, as in scientism. Now, scientism is a sort of religion of science. They have the belief that science can give you the answer to everything. You can see that in our definition of technocracy. It's basically a totalitarian dictatorship of scientists. You can see that with what we have with the FDA being ruled by drug makers. You can see it with our schools. You can see it in our universities. You can see the rotten fruit of technocracy, or this concept, this anti-democratic, anti-free market concept, just about everywhere in the world today. You can see it. Now, the reason why it is so dangerous, it is so arrogant, and it is so insane is that if you remember Adam Smith's invisible hand, the entire concept was based on the idea that free markets are the best determiner of prices, supply, and demand. And your first year economic freshman should be able to look at a supply and demand curve and see that they meet at price. Apparently, the technocrats in Norway don't understand that. So the same people who believe that it is better for you that they determine prices are also suppressing the price of silver. We have technocrats in this country who have determined that it's not good for the price of silver to rise because that might cast some aspersions upon their technocratic leadership, which is the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the banks, and all the rest of these people. So this is how it connects. This is the scientism of technocracy. It is an anti-democratic, it is an anti-free market, and it is a totalitarian movement. And in my opinion, it began on 11/11/11 with the coordinated promotion of this term technocrat and technocracy. It was not an accident, was not a mistake. These people are dangerous. They're very dangerous, and they want to convince you that the free market is broken and doesn't work. They want to convince you that democracy is broken and doesn't work, and it would be best for us all if we just handed over all of our economies and our political systems over to these scientists who really know what's best for us but can't seem to keep a usable supply of butter. And we'll talk to you next time.